Hey everybody, and welcome to Bible Study That Doesn't Suck. Pastor Amanda was on earlier, but we chatted so long that she ran out of time for Bible study. So you're just stuck with me. That's okay though. I like you too. So this week we have some interesting readings coming up. If you are someone who is feeling a bit snarly or snarky, these might be some readings for you. I'll put the text down here when I post this on justlutheran.blogspot.com if you want to scroll down. The reading from Exodus for this Sunday is one where God declares that they're a verb, that they are out there in the world. I am what I am. It's not as Popeye. I am what I am. It's not as Popeye in the Hebrew as it sounds in the English. It's more about I am what I'm doing. So God is a verb. I am known through the actions that happen in the world. And I think I like this a lot because that's kind of my philosophy of being in the world. We are known by what we get done and by what we follow through with and by the ways that we care for people and the ways that we love. And Jesus also echoes this later by saying that as you have done it to the least of these, there you have done it to me. So God says, or at least Jesus says, that the way that God will measure who and what we are is based on the verbing that we do in the world. So how loving happens and how caring for each other happens. If we're feeding people, all those things with an ing, all of the subjunctives. If we're feeding and loving and joying and worshiping and doing wonderful things in the world. So what we're putting into the world is who and what we are, in the same way that what God is putting into the world is who and what God is. But that, I think, is a little, that's important, but it's a little bit less interesting than the Jeremiah reading, which is one of the choices that pastors and faithful folk can make for this week. Jeremiah is a very cool prophet who lived in a couple decades before the fall of Judah, in 586 BCE. And I like Jeremiah a lot because Jeremiah is like the crabby guy next door who's like, get off my lawn, right? Jeremiah is so crabby that one of my favorite things that happens in the Bible happens in the book of Jeremiah, where God says to Jeremiah, here, will you take care of my dirty underpants? And will you go bury them next to a bank where they're going to get all moldy and yucky? And will you leave them there for like weeks and weeks and then come back later and unbury them? Because when you unbury them and they're moldy and yucky, my dirty underpants will be how I feel about you. It will be the ways that you have festered in society and the way everything is terrible. And that is a hysterical metaphor, and it plays out over a very long time. It's like very few and far between that we get the chance to have a beautiful metaphor that could play out over weeks, right? You might tell a funny joke about underwear or poop or farts, but you're not going to take weeks and weeks and weeks to do it. And that's a funny moment in the book of Jeremiah. Look it up. It's a good time. So Jeremiah is a prophet who is grumpy. I think that might be, most prophets are grumpy, but Jeremiah is a prophet who is grumpy because of the weight of the world, and all of the things that are happening in the world around him are getting him down, and he's feeling very frustrated about it. And so much so that in this week's reading, it says, I do not sit in the company of merrymakers, nor do I rejoice, right? So this is not a guy who laughs and parties and is having fun, because Jeremiah is really holding the weight of everything that's tragic and terrible in the world, and talks about pain increasing and refusing. My wound is incurable and I refuse to be healed, right? So it's a nagging, festering grumpiness that Jeremiah has. And yet, in the midst of this crabbiness and this grumpiness, Jeremiah is certain that Jeremiah is speaking the will of God, right? You will serve as my mouth, God says to Jeremiah. It is they who will turn to you. So like Jeremiah doesn't even have to do the hard work of convincing people to like come to church or convincing people that God is on Jeremiah's side. Jeremiah is told by God, don't worry, people will follow you. I'll take care of that part. All you have to do is speak my words to the people who show up. They will not prevail over you, for I am with you to save you and deliver you, right? So really awesome if God showed up and was like, guess what? You're doing the right thing. Woohoo! Keep it up. Number two, it would be awesome if God showed up and was like, you know how hard it is to get people to show up to your events and your activities and your justice projects? Well, I'm going to make them show up. So God is going to do the PR. God is going to be the promotion person who's going to make sure that people show up and hear the message that's going to be spoken. And then if they still are mad at you based on what you say, and they're grumpy about it, God's going to deliver you from that as well, right? So God is the PR person. God is the hype person who's like, hey, this person's amazing, listen to them. And then God's the bouncer who gets rid of the crabby people who don't like it when things don't go your way. And that, my friends, is some God who's going to like make Jeremiah go do the thing with the underpants later. So, you know, God's a good bouncer, but it comes at a cost, and it comes at the cost of crazy metaphors. But I think this is fun. If you are someone who, like Jeremiah, sees danger everywhere or preaches danger everywhere, as Jeremiah's nickname is danger everywhere. So if you're someone who sees danger everywhere, you're worried about danger everywhere, you don't understand why the world is partying when there's clearly so much work to be doing, then my hope is that you will find comfort in a God who names and claims you and stands alongside you and is willing to be a part of what you are up to. So Jeremiah is a part of something called the Lament Tradition, and it comes from the Psalms. There's a number of Psalms where people are allowed to challenge God and challenge how good God is at bringing the justice God promised to the world. And you're allowed to be sad about it when it hasn't happened yet. So we get to mope and be like, the arc of justice is too long, right? Or you get to, justice is going to come like an ever-flowing stream, but man, it's taking forever. So we get to complain about that, and that's a part of being faithful. It's a normal thing that happens in Scripture. And for Jeremiah, he is experiencing, when he's talking about how miserable he is, he's not talking about like people not liking him. He's not talking about like his own grumpiness. He's talking about empathy. He's talking about carrying the weight of the world. So when people he loves are suffering, he feels it deeply inside of himself. And this kind of empathy is what I hope we all will have. It's the reason we keep on doing our subjunctive verbing. Like, it's the reason we're always feeding and hoping and loving and wishing and carrying on, not because we need our own sense of relief, but because we feel the weight that no one is free until everyone is free, that there is no justice until all people can have some justice. And so that's what Jeremiah is up to. He talks about that he's not able to make merry. And the only reason other people are happy and making merry is because they're wearing blinders. They're not able to see all the terrible things that are happening in the world. And so not only is his joy God's joy, and not only are his words God's words, but his suffering is God's suffering. And so this is a God who intimately comes, who not only names and claims us, but has empathy with us. And I think that's a pretty fantastic thing. So hooray for Jeremiah. So in Psalm 626, sorry, I'm dyslexic. Psalm 26 is a psalm of integrity, which I'm a big fan of. Hooray for integrity. Even when it gets you in trouble, say the thing that is truthful, because it's easier to remember what you said if you just say the truthful thing. And I truly believe, as some do who walk the way of nonviolence that I do, that integrity in little things gives you integrity in big things. So if you are known as someone who would not accidentally steal the pen from the bank, then you can never be accused of the person stealing the money from the bank, right? And so do as many things full of integrity as you can, because then people will not believe it when people make stuff up about you. So Psalm 26 is a psalm of integrity saying, vindicate me, O God, for I have walked with integrity. So if you are someone who is in the midst of people not believing who you are or not trusting your heart or thinking misleading things about you, this is a fun psalm to pray. I like the part about, I wash my hands in innocence and I go to your altar, O God, singing aloud a song of thanksgiving and telling all about your wondrous deeds. And so Martin Luther used to talk about every time you wash your hands, think about your baptism and remember that you're named and claimed and loved by God, right? You can never be separated from God no matter what has happened in your life. So remembering those promises, that's kind of what's happening where it's talking about I wash my hands in innocence. One of the things that I was taught during my clinical pastoral education, which is a part of pastor training amongst Presbyterians and Lutherans and Methodists and Episcopalians, before we become pastors, we spend a concerted amount of time in hospitals learning about life and death and resurrection and hope and caring for people in those spaces where they might be scared or afraid. And before I go in to a hospital room, I wash my hands. Not only because it's a good thing to do to care for those who are sick inside, but also because it helps you center yourselves. It helps you wash God's love and remember your purpose and remember who you are representing when it's in that space. So it's less about me needing to say the right things and more about me needing to bring God into the situation. And then after I leave, no matter what happens in that room, if someone says, shove off, I don't want faithful people around, or if that person has a very intense prayer that is weighing on my heart, I always, at the end of the conversation, I wash my hands again. And the idea is that no matter how intense or how terrible or whatever happens in that space, I'm going to wash my hands and I'm not going to try to carry it with me. I'm not going to take baggage from that conversation to my next space. It might touch my heart and it might change me, but I'm going to intentionally try to leave in that room what happened in that room. And that's helpful with confidentiality as well. I'm not going to go off and share everything that happened with a bunch of other people. So I like this imagery. It resonates with me in this psalm. I wash my hands in innocence and go around your altar, O God, singing a loud song of thanksgiving and telling of all your wondrous deeds. And so this is a psalm of saying, when people are mean to you, whether you deserve it or not, you have your own integrity, right? So you know that you've had integrity in small things. So you've had integrity in big things. So if people try to say you're not trustworthy, you will eventually be believed. But during the time before you are believed, you can wash your hands of everything that's happening and not have to take it in, not have to let accusations that aren't true get inside and agitate you into violence or into revenge or into things that will distract you from loving God or being a part of what God has called you to do. And this can be really important work, not only because anger is easy and love is hard, but because if we look at the Romans chapter 12, it's an entire 2 paragraphs about no revenge, trying to set aside ways that people have been mean to you so that you can go forward with love and light and hope in the world. It's extending this verbing and how we can try to be kind people even when people are jerky to us. And this is not a let people beat the crap out of you kind of text. It's about actually how love wins, right? And I've been thinking about this a lot because there have been people who have come to San Francisco with the purpose of baiting people into being violent towards them. And I have taken the stance of let's let love win. Let's not take the bait. And let's try to do what we can to step outside of anger and outside of hate, because the more we can step outside of anger and hate, the more we can act out of our truest self, the more we can have integrity to who we are, and the more we can inspire other people to be safe and sane. And I really think this Romans text is so important that I'm just going to read it. And if you're someone who's been hurt by Romans text, know that I have too. And so I'm not reading that kind of text. This is just a really, really pretty one. And Romans is complicated because it starts with all the things that people hate about other people, and then it gets to the part where it's compassion and joy and love, and it's saying all of those things that are dividing you, all those petty little differences you have created, they're not important. What is important is God's love for you, and the way that God sees you and the way that God loves you is not to hold on to those petty little differences. And so first of all, if you're someone who's been hurt by Romans, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that. And know that we're in the part that's about not carrying on those petty differences. So if you normally would turn this off because something from Romans was going to be read, give it a second. I promise. It's a pretty part. Let love be genuine. Hate what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with mutual affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not lag in zeal. Be ardent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in suffering. Persevere in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Extend hospitality to strangers. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Be not haughty, but associate with the lowly. Do not claim to be wiser than you are. Do not repay evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. If it is possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave room for the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. No, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. For by doing this, you will heap burning coals on their heads. Do not be overcome by evil. Overcome evil with good. Overcome evil with good. It's a hard thing to do. So hard. The hardest thing to do. And this is what separates mere humans from saints. I think of Mother Teresa in this space, where she was able to ignore fuddy-duddy people who thought that she wasn't important because she was siding with the poor, and she was able to hold the light in deep darkness. And when people were angry with her, she was able to stay constant to not repaying evil with evil. And anger is a tricky little thing. My theory is that evil always turns anger into itself, meaning that anger is hard to control. You might be angry at Nazis. You might be angry at domestic violence. You might be angry at oppression. But anger is very hard to control and very hard to transform into something that is going to be life-giving in the world. And so the more work we can do to be stable people so that we don't get rid of the anger that drives us to be just or to work to better our world, to keep doing that verbing that I was talking about earlier. Like, the difference between maybe a regular person and a pastor is that when pastors get angry, they create a new program, right? When pastors are mad that kids are homeless in schools, they get backpack programs and they work on shelters for families. And so if you can have enough righteous anger that you can use it as food for working on the beloved community, then use anger for good. If the way you house anger in your body is to yell at people and say things you regret, then you first have to work on your own self and sitting with yourself and sitting with your anger and titrating. Titrating is a word used in chemistry, and it means just the perfect amount. It's not too much so that something is dangerous, and it's not too little that you don't have a chemical reaction at all. So you need to find just the perfect amount. You need to titrate your anger so that it fuels justice and it fuels you getting good things done in the world, but not that you have so much that it's dangerous or that it's uncontrollable or that it's not possible for justice to overcome the amount of anger that you have. The difficulty as a Lutheran is that Martin Luther was not a good role model when it came to anger. Martin believed that because you could sin boldly, because God loved you and named you and claimed you, and there's nothing you could ever do to screw it up, that he could keep a vice. He could keep a vice and enjoy doing that thing he knew was wrong. And for him, he kept anger. And there are some people who wonder if Luther perhaps had moments of being an angry alcoholic, or if he perhaps had moments where his anger was too quickly captured on the printing press, which was brand new, or his angry moments were taken advantage of by princes and kings in a public that was also equally angry. And they used that to kill people, to kill Mennonites and Anabaptists. And his anger, where he originally was working with Jewish people and with rabbis, his anger towards the end of his life, towards those very same people, ends up fueling the Holocaust. And it was Martin Luther's words that made that happen. And so, as Lutherans, we have to repent for the anger of our past, the anger of our namesake, the anger of the founder of our faith. We do it not because we trivialize what Martin Luther did, but we do it because being able to acknowledge anger from the past that was wrong helps us to have more possibility to acknowledge anger in our present time that is wrong. If we can't talk about the past and apologize for things that went wrong in retrospect, we'll never be able to apologize for things on the present day as they're happening. And we need to learn to become people who can add apologizing to one of the salvific things that we do in the world. Feeding, joying, loving, saving, apologizing. And it's important because there are times when we are the ones who are experiencing injustice. There are times when we are the most oppressed person in the room, and there are other times when we are the oppressors. Each and every one of us, simultaneously saint and sinners, and simultaneously oppressors and oppressees. And whether or not we're victims or whether or not we are people who are actively or passively a part of oppressing others is outside of the point. I think what is most important in the context that we live in is that we can become people who can apologize when we are wrong. That part of living with integrity is being willing not only to lead and not only to follow, but to apologize when in retrospect you said something a way you didn't mean to, or in retrospect you did something in a way that you wish you could have known to do better. Apologizing makes you stronger. It makes you better. We have to be people who are learning from our behaviors and our actions and our mistakes and shouting with joy and celebrating even the tiniest moments of justice that happen around us, because goodness gracious, it's too far in between when we get to see those moments where justice is flowing like an ever-flowing stream. So what does that look like? Gospel reading. You like how I'm magically tying them all together this week? It wasn't me. It wasn't me. It was a group of ye olde guys a long, long time ago who put this, what is called the lectionary together. It's a 3-year cycle of readings, and very often they are intentionally thematic. So we get to the reading from Matthew. This is a little more, it's a little more tough. It's a little bit tricky. So this is a text where Jesus is saying, yay, I'm going to die. Well, he doesn't really say yay, but he's like, I'm going to die because it's the right thing. And that's what's going to happen because I ain't afraid of you. I'm going to have integrity, and that means I'm going to die. So here I go. And Peter, whose name means rock because he was the rock of the church, and he was like the best of the disciples who don't really understand what's happening. So he was like the best of the worst. Says, God forbid it. Like, don't die. Don't die. That would be terrible. We need you, right? Keep verbing. You can't verb in the world if you're dead. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block. Now, earlier in this text, Jesus has said that those who are a stumbling block to the way that Jesus is working on should be drowned in the ocean rather than allow other people to stumble on them. So these are like fighting words of all fighting words. The reference to Satan, get behind me, Satan. Satan was the person that came down to earth when they believed that God lived up in the sky and couldn't see everything that was happening. Everything that's happening all the time. The idea was that Satan would come down, a little bit like the Greek god Mercury, and he would ask questions to people to see if they were as faithful to God when God wasn't looking as when God was looking, right? And so he was the integrity hall monitor. So get behind me, Satan could mean stop being the integrity hall monitor. It could mean you're working side by side with me and that question was supposed to be asked. It's hard to tell, given the context. But then Jesus goes on to say, listen, y'all, if you're following me, this is going to suck. You're all going to have to march towards death. And that was really the literal case for the early Christians. They were being slaughtered, and all of the characters in this text will die. And so Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me. Woohoo! Take up your cross and follow me. And a lot of beautiful songs have been written about that, even though those words are creepy and morbid. And then Jesus ends with, truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the kingdom, the Son of Man come into his kingdom. And some people think that means that like God's going to come back before these people die. That didn't happen, so they had to do some quick explaining about that. I think it probably has more to do with the fact that Jesus is going to rise from the dead in 3 days. And unless people died in 3 days after, like before Jesus resurrected and came back. Yeah. So I don't know. It's hard to know. It's hard to know what's going on in this space. What I want to say to you is this. If you are truly doing the verbing of God, if you are loving, if you are turning the other cheek, if you are doing this on a scale that people are noticing you, if you are a grumpy prophet, there are going to be times when people are so super mad at you. And they might be church people, and they might be people on the internet. It might be trolls. It might be bullies. There are going to be people who are mad at you. It might be your own family who's like, well, why do you have to make a big deal about it? We just want you to have pizza with us, right? We all have moments where we experience pushback. And you have to look within yourself. You have to get good feedback from people you love and trust. Not too much, because you still need to have confidence and strength to like do the things that God is calling you to do. But there will be people who question you. And as someone who has a lot of Facebook followers, people who don't know you at all, who think they do. And they will question your integrity, and they will tell you that you're doing everything wrong and you're the reason. Like I've had people call me members of the KKK this whole past week because I wanted to peacefully protest Nazis instead of trying to punch them in the face, right? So we're all going to make decisions that put people on different sides of how they feel about us. When you are in those moments, when you are in the deep darkness of people not knowing if you're a good witch or a bad witch, as we like to say in our family, because we watch The Wizard of Oz, and my kids will say, is this a good witch or a bad witch? When you are in a moment where people are actively trying to discern whether you are from God or acting for God, or whether you're acting for something else, or whether you're terrible, and when we're in the midst of times, when we're in the thick of it, when anger is all around us and people's mourning is coming out of their pores in ways that aren't respectful of others, but are really good for their healing. That's the nice pastor way to look at it, right? When we are afraid and we say things that we don't expect to, we will, all of us, find ourselves in a time of wondering, are we the ones putting someone on a cross, or are we the ones hanging from the cross? And it's not always clear. We should, in those moments, err on the side of compassion, err on the side of feeding our enemies, err on the side of not having revenge, as the Romans text told us. We should err on the side of apologizing if we're not certain. And if we truly feel called by God to take a stand or to be God's voice in the world, we have to do it. Even if we're proven wrong later, and even if every other Christian on the planet is against us, because would you rather get a lot of credit and awards on earth, or have God be super excited about what you were up to? And for me, that's the hard part. There is no certainty until God comes down in a booming voice, until there are new stone tablets that tell you whether or not you're making a good choice. I think the hardest thing faithful people can do is live in uncertain times if you're doing the right thing or not. So let's err on the side of loving and caring for each other. Let's remember that there's lots of different ways of being faithful in this world. There's lots of different ways of being Christian. There's lots of different ways of doing justice. So some people are going to punch Nazis. Other people are going to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches so that people who are dancing in protest don't pass out. There are lots of people whose job it's going to be to hold up barricades to keep spaces as safe as possible. There are some people who are going to drive cars in certain orders so that other people can't use cars as domestic terrorism. Like, we all have a different space of where we're going to be in this world. Some are going to play the organ music, and some are going to sing, and some are going to preach, and some are going to be teachers, and some are going to be doing the daycare, and some are going to just be making the emergency disaster plans, because if an earthquake happens, that's going to be way more important than whether or not someone is rallying in our space that day. I can't tell you where you should be and what verbs you should choose to do. I can't tell you what history is going to shake out to become and which sides are going to prevail. I can err on the side of love and compassion and verbing, though. And so that's what I'm up to. And let me remind you this, you might do all the right things, and then, like Jeremiah, God asks you to hold his dirty underpants. Like, the prize of being a faithful follower of God could be that God plays an underwear joke on you that takes weeks to unfold. So know that things look strange. Winners are losers and losers are winners, I think. So be kind to yourselves. Be kind to yourselves. Verb as kindly as you can towards other people. And when all of those things are too much for you, then pray boldly and wash your hands. Wash your hands. Wash your hands of all that clings to you, that is unnecessary, that is not yours to hold on to, and that is not your call to respond to. And I don't know a single person who has ever done that effectively. I've read Mother Teresa's life riddled with wondering whether or not she was doing the right things. And so I just thank you for being someone who's willing to trudge through these thick justice issues with me. And I am grateful that there are people like you who are willing to ponder, like, the ethics of how we should be in the world. And I'm grateful that you care about God enough to come to a Bible study that doesn't suck for this long. And you are my hope, because your affirmations to me and your well wishes and your even just thumbs up on Facebook help me know that there are some folk who are living with integrity the best they can, who are loving with integrity the best they can. And God darn it, I love you. So that's Bible study for this week. We'll see you again next Wednesday, and I hope you all are well. Stay safe, stay sane. Bye.